Welcome everyone. I declare this meeting of the Planning Committee for the Port Phillip City Council open, and I welcome the members of the public who are here tonight. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willam clan of the Boonwurrung. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. We acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to this land. Council has a local law that determines how this meeting will be conducted. There is a time allotted in tonight's agenda for public question time. There is also an opportunity for members of the public to ask a question or make a comment on a specific item on tonight's agenda. This will be done prior to the committee considering the item. If you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form that is available at the table just outside the chamber and hand it to a staff member. If you've already registered online, please ensure you let a staff member know that you are present. I encourage you to try to limit your questions and comments to around 3 minutes and to try to avoid repeating any points that have been previously made by other speakers. This committee can only address questions and deal with items within its delegation, that is, planning matters. All planning committee meetings are live streamed to allow the community to watch and listen to meetings in real time. Please note that under Council's local law, this meeting cannot be filmed or audio taped unless permission is granted by the Chair. In the unlikely event of an emergency evacuation, please follow the instructions of the emergency warden. So, the first item on the agenda, councillors, is apologies. It looks as though we are all present, so there are no apologies. The second item is the minutes of previous meetings. The minutes of the Planning Committee have been circulated. Do I have any questions about the minutes? No. Do I have a mover? It looks like Councillor Gross moved. Do I have a seconder to accept them? Councillor Voss. All those in favour? That's carried. Item number 3, declaration of conflicts of interest. Do any councillors have a conflict of interest in a matter being discussed at tonight's meeting? I note there are not. Item number 4, public question time. Councillors, I don't believe we have any speakers for public question time, although we have a couple of speakers for one of the reports tonight. So we will then move to item number 5 on the agenda, councillor question time. Councillors, are there any questions for the officers? Councillor Voss.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Baxter. And I haven't given officers a heads up on this one, but I just wanted to understand what would be needed to implement within our planning scheme if, for example, we wanted to have residences, in particular MUDs, multi-unit developments, have the ability to take secure parcels. And I ask that because if a parcel delivery gets dropped off once rather than carded, and then they have to go back and they perhaps card it again, and then perhaps then the person has to then drive and go get it, it just would reduce a lot of traffic trips, car trips, for example. It just makes a lot of sense. So if we were to put or make that a condition, for example, on our applications going forward, houses, but more importantly, multi-unit developments, what's needed in our planning scheme, or is anything needed in our planning scheme?
Mr. Ball.
Through you, Mr. Chair. There's sufficient provision now that's available, particularly through mailboxes, and that could be done. In many instances, my knowledge is if a person comes and drops a delivery off, they'll often leave a receipt and ask you to go and collect it. I think that seems to be the normal approach. I don't think we can certainly cover every aspect in through the planning controls. It's an ability to just deal with the way the building's designed, but the reality is I don't think the planning scheme will cover every element. So I think the current situation will work fine. I don't think it's a planning scheme control.
Thank you, Mr. Borg. Councillors, any other questions for the officers? No? If not, then I will move to the presentation of reports, item 6, and on to item 6.1, 103 Beach Street, Port Melbourne. Now, councillors, we've received 2 requests from members of the public to speak to this item. So I will first call on Eddie McAuliffe to address council.
Eddie McAuliffe.
And Mr McAuliffe, if you could state your name and suburb for the record and then address council, please.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, my name is Eddie McAuliffe and I live at 70 The Crescent in Beacon Cove, Port Melbourne. I'm also president of the Beacon Cove Neighbourhood Association, which has some 450 members, which is an active residents group in the area. Go ahead. Yeah. All right. I'll just make my comments very brief because most of the work in relation to this issue has been done with the current developer and with the previous developers. So over the last 5 years, we've been actively involved and we've had discussions with the council as well as the 2 sets of developers, and we're pretty much they've pretty much taken on board most of the concerns we have. I would like to say that we would like in the statement in the dwelling, the plans going from 3 to 4 storey, which adds an additional 1.6 metres, and I understand that that is an agreed position between us as a community, the developers, and we've had discussions with George and the officers in the council. The difficulty we have with that situation is that if it's sold on like it was previously, the status of that commitment that's given, how can we control that? I don't suppose we can ultimately control it, but we would like a statement from the developer to say that they are committed to that and publicly declare that position. That would be appreciated. Secondly, we do have concerns about the walkway between the when the tramway duplication takes place and the cafe on the side of it as part of the 103 Beach Street, and the competition between people attempting to get on the tram and bikes coming through and ship passengers coming off the ship. It's a recipe for some sort of, how shall I say, some sort of incident happening, and I think a lot of thought should be given into the way that especially the bicycle, some of the bicycle users are sometimes overzealous, if I can say that kindly, and otherwise they're speeding through trying to get to work or whatever, and there could be a dangerous situation there. The other point I'll make is we did have some issues in relation, and we've had discussions with both the developer and the proprietor, and hopefully they'll resolve their issues. But overall I can say, look, I put on record people come along and blast the council, but I think in this case we've worked pretty well with all parties, and I think that's, to me, it's a template for the way residents groups should work with both the developer and the council and the council officers. And I think if that had happened in 1 to 7 Waterfront Place, we would have had a different outcome today. So they're my brief comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McAuliffe. We have one more speaker, which is on behalf of the applicant, Lachlan Anderson. Now, I believe, Mr. Anderson, you have a presentation as well. So hope that's all set up. But if you could just state your name and suburb for the record and then begin your presentation.
Sure. Lachlan Anderson on behalf of Woodmarsh Architecture and our client, V-Leader, Port Melbourne. So firstly, we just wish to note this application is an amendment to the previously approved design by Key Infrastructure, which consists of a development of 3 levels and 14 apartments with supermarket and retail offerings at the ground floor. Next slide, please. The site's located between commercial and residential areas. We don't believe the previously approved scheme reflected its landmark position at the top of Station Pier, and as the arrival and departure point for visitors to Melbourne. The immediate area has a multitude of architectural styles. The port buildings, tram station, contemporary low-rise commercial, residential tower and double-storey residential. There's little consistency in styles. Our response is a contemporary and appropriate architectural response which reacts to the site conditions. Next slide, please. So the light green shown there is mainly residential, and the dark green are the commercial operations to the south. Given its setting between commercial and residential areas, we see the need for this building to have a civic presence facing the south and the east, and a more residential presence to the north. The building's divided into three core elements. A plinth, which is the ground level, providing a robust base with varying levels of permeability appropriate to the internal uses going on behind. Next slide. A skin, which is the next two levels, clad in a slightly reflective ceramic tile with a variation in texture. We want this to act as a focal point at the end of the axis of Station Pier. And that level, the openings expand and contract to, depending on the orientation. And the fourth level is a floating roof, a very delicate element separated by a band of glazing, aiming to lighten that top floor and act as a counterpoint to the heavier lower levels. The north elevation has shaded balconies facing the north with city views. Ground floor has views through to the retail and supermarket, with the services and car park entries concealed. The south elevation, which is shown there, is more opaque at the apartment levels, still achieving views for residents, but shielding them from prevailing winds and noise, which come from the bay and the port activities. Permeability through the site is achieved by dual entries for the supermarket, one from the south and one from the north, and we've increased the footprint of the previously approved scheme for the shared path to the east.
Mr. Anderson, we have passed 3 minutes, so I
Sure.
hope you are approaching conclusion.
Sure. We'd like to note that we have added a fourth floor, but by reducing the ground floor, the increase, as Eddie mentioned, is only 1.6 metres, and given the large setbacks to the top floor, we think that's provides a minimal additional element to the mass. I'm quite happy to stop there if needs be.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off at the knees, but
That's right.
okay. So, well, thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. Yes, I know. So, I guess I'll just ask if any of the councillors have questions for the applicant. I did see Councillor Brand's hand up. Go ahead.
I've got two questions. Can we go back to the elevation, the front elevation, this one? Yeah. This is just one small issue of detail. It's one of the conditions we've put on. Is to increase the transparency of the entrance at the supermarket front, and which seems like a reasonable idea to me. But I want to hear from you whether you think that it affects the functionality or the the reading and the beauty of the actual architecture in some way that we don't see, or doesn't it matter too much?
Sure. Look, I think in the first instance, we didn't have an entry to the supermarket from the north, and after consultation with the community, that was brought back in as a something they would find useful. So to that end, at this stage, we allowed for one entry. I think the south is where the majority of the supermarket traffic comes from. So we saw a smaller entry from the north more as a convenience rather than I guess a big branding for the supermarket. We're also conscious that the apartment entries are either side of that supermarket opening, and giving, I guess, a respectful priority to the residents and their front door, effectively, was just something we were conscious of.
Are you happy with that condition put on it, or would you prefer? I mean, are there reasons that you would ask us not to put on it?
Look, I think the 60% is going to be challenging to quantify. I think I'm not sure if there's another way that could be interpreted or considered, that it's less a percentage, more of a well, I don't know, something we work through progressively with council to get to an agreeable position.
Okay, I've got one other question, which is sort of a more general urban design one, which I'm interested to hear your answer on. Basically, give us a sort of a narrative about what's going on with this building. When you look at your building, it's a very two-sided building, even though the ends are good too. But this is the grand formal frontage, like a Baroque palace, pretty much. Around the back is a much more informal one. I think very beautiful, but not very formal. When I look at this site, and if we want to look at the aerial view of the whole precinct,
might need to
it seems to me back to the start. It really strongly seems to me that you've got a sort of like a perfect landscape for a Baroque palace to the south, where you'd have the formal front, the columns, and the engagement with the public space, where you've got balconies overlooking it, activity directed towards it, and this huge, ridiculous axial sort of Versailles sort of from the air gardens in front. I don't understand why the building is so orientated to what we'd normally think was the back of the site, and the back of the building is orientated to the main grand public space. I don't understand that. I do understand the environmental reasons.
Councillor Brand, is that your question?
That is my question.
Why is it oriented that way?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I might refer to the floor plans if we could. The apartments, the next plan, sorry. The apartments run from front to back. So each apartment has a north and a south view. We've placed living areas to the north to take advantage of the obvious benefits of that. And that pushes bedrooms to the south. So that perhaps somewhat justifies the more closed nature of that south facade, that there's bedrooms, they're private, but being on that axis means there's the potential for a lot more view through or through to those rooms. So closing it down, keeping it slightly more private is the main reason for that treatment of the facade in that manner.
Okay, I believe Councillor Voss had a question.
Thank you. I'm curious about the urban art component within the conditions. Have you given any thought to what that would look like and where that would be located?
Yes, we have. There's an area, maybe we go to the south elevation if we could. There's to the left of the supermarket entry, there's a large area of empty wall, which is a potential area where something could be incorporated if that were to be on the building, for example. Otherwise, that southern plaza, which is a redesign for council to consider, perhaps that might be a more appropriate place for something of that nature. So rather than stuck to the building, it could be something more more within the public realm, and I think that Southern Plaza probably provides a good opportunity there.
Have you also considered the area between the tram stop and that blank wall? I think that's also a very good area for urban art.
That area is very constricted, and I think, as mentioned previously, it's got foot traffic and bike traffic. So I think it's going to it might not be the best place for something to be seen. It's going to be more of a thoroughfare than something that's viewed from any distance.
Councillor Bond.
I have a question regarding that particular thoroughfare, and I'm not sure if you're the right person to answer it or the officer. So I'll ask it of you, and if it's not you, then we can ask the officer again later. And it does concern that particular space between the new double terminus tram stop proposed and your building. Is there some sort of master plan for that particular space to show that this works? That we have left enough room for cyclists to safely get through there while pedestrians get through there, and trams, obviously, that it all does work, and we have left enough room between the side of your building and the tram stop. Does someone have that? Because there's a little design in here, but it doesn't show me the functionality of the cycling and the walking and how it will flow. The
currently approved scheme had a setback from the duplicated tram line to the ground floor building edge. We've increased that slightly to cater for the need for cyclists and pedestrians to coexist there. The design for the duplicated tram line was provided to us from council, I believe. Might need correcting there. So as far as we understand, that's all been accounted for. And Yarra Trams have, there's been significant consultation with them to ensure that the proximity of the building to the tram lines is something they're happy with.
And just to follow up on that, is all that going to be built at the same time as your building, or is it part of your proposal that the walkway through there and the realignment of the path and the movement of any barriers that look to be in the way, is all that going to happen as part of your build? And then,
so the developer doesn't have control over Yarra Tram's timeline. What's been accounted for is the space required and the easement for that walkway. Ideally, it would happen at the same time, but should it not, then if it was the current condition, this building would be built and the easement would be there with just a single tram line. So there would need to be some change to the path network as it stands. If they were to happen simultaneously, then that would be a better outcome. I think you'd only have to do.
Is that currently a condition of the planning permit, or?
I'm not sure.
We might, when we get to questions for officers, we might ask that question again. Councillor Voss.
Thank you. I'd also like to take this opportunity. That's probably something in the next stage of this process, but I'm quite curious about plans around hoarding around the development site, and to make sure that it is good-looking development site, a construction site, if I could put it like that. Are there any plans to sort of screen the site and put something on it so it actually looks nice in the area?
Look, I think you're right. That would be a stage, in a following stage, and probably part of a construction management plan condition. And yeah, look, that would be part of the contractor's role to address that.
All right, councillors, do we have any more questions for Mr. Anderson? Or shall we move on to questions for officers? Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. You can resume your seat. Councillors, do we have questions for the officers? Otherwise, I'll just go back to Councillor Bond's question. Councillor Bond, would you like to restate your question to the officers?
It just concerns the public realm between the proposed double terminus tram stop and this particular building. Is there a master plan for all that particular area, and who's going to be responsible for implementing it? Can we do that whilst this is a building site to save us coming back at some point in time in the future and redoing this area when it becomes time to do the double terminus tram stop?
Through you, Mr Chair, there's current work undertaken for a master plan. We don't have exact details of the timing of when those things will coincide. There is a condition requiring a 173 agreement for the shared path to be created, and then to be through the process for this. So.
Thank you. Councillors, any other questions for the officers? Councillor Brandt?
Could I just ask about the condition around the entry to the supermarket on the north side? I don't exactly understand how the opening up of that wall more transparently actually works, and I'm just wondering how it works and if there's a chance for some slightly more permissive sort of to council satisfaction type condition that could go on that.
Through you, Mr Chair, the condition was required to open up the supermarket so it wouldn't be a blank wall and so it wouldn't have shelving along the facade of the supermarket, to provide a more active realm to the car park area, which is the public realm. In regard to the condition, the 60% was seen as a reasonable amount of space that would be required for an active interface between the two sides of the building and the car park.
Sorry, Mr Borges.
Can I add to Mr Parkinson's answer as well? The conditions are always to council's satisfaction, so if we feel in discussions with the applicant, then the applicant's architect, that it's not working, we certainly will have that discussion and we can provide some variation if required.
Councillor Voss, did you have a question? I thought I saw your hand.
Yes, I do have a question. I did raise this earlier today, so I will ask again around the car parking. In terms of the council-owned car park, what are the plans for that? Have we got plans for that after this has been, after the building has been finished, or does the applicant just have to return it to its current spot?
Through you, Mr Chair. So the current proposal, the existing approval would provide the 16 car parking spaces. Some of those car parking spaces are within the title boundaries of the site. There would be later work that may be done for a bigger plan for this area, but the proposal as it would provide would still retain the 10 car parking spaces on the northern side of the car park area, which would still be able to be accessed in a forward direction. So the conditions would rely some changes to reduce the car parking to 10 spaces, which would still be able to be accessed for the community.
Ms Rosett?
Just to add to that response, the developer would be required to return the land back to the form it was in prior to commencement of works, and there'll be permits required for any occupancy. And aside from that, we are completing some work on the urban design of that area and working with the Victorian Planning Association, and we'll be working with key stakeholders to develop some plans for the waterfront precinct, which will look at the public open space that's available for the community to optimise vibrancy and improve the amenity of the local area.
Councillor Voss?
So I'm assuming that the staging area will be in that, for the construction will be in that front car park on Beach Street. Is there any compensation details that we need to work out now, or is that in the building permit stage?
Through you, Mr Chairman, I can answer that. It'll be part of our local laws permits that are issued, so if there's any form of occupancy of council land, there's a fee for that, and so that will be charged accordingly at the time. Yes, and as Ms Rogers has indicated, that it would be repaired to the state that it was in, Additionally, I was going to also add that Condition 8 requires that the supermarket actually only functions when there are a minimum of those 10 spaces provided. So there is a link between the provision of the spaces and the actual use, and the use actually has to cease if those places are not available. So it really does become, the commencement of use is very much tied to those 10 car spaces.
Thank you, Mr. Borg. Councillor Brand.
I'd just like to ask officers, following on my question to the applicant about the, I suppose, the public face of the building to the, what are we calling it, Pier Plaza, or whatever it is at the foot of the station pier in that public space. There seems to be very little or none urban design sort of analysis, attention paid to that. I'm just wondering, there may be a VCAT reason attached to it, which I'd just like to hear on the record, why so little attention seems to have been focused on this issue.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is an amendment application, so Council has considered the application against the previous proposal. Overall, it is noted that the application does have more of a noticeable facade on the northern side, but it's still a proposal that's considered a significant improvement on the scheme that has been approved in terms of the materiality that's proposed, some of the curved features, the more regular spacing of the building. We think this is a significant improvement on the original design that has already been approved.
Councillors, any more questions for the officers? If not, we do have okay, Councillor Brand, one question.
I just want to ask the officers about the question asked by Mr. Mikulev about what is the situation if this gets unsold? What are the guarantees that the concessions that Council has given the applicants on the basis of the quality of the design work and what have you, what are the, I suppose, the protective measures we have in place that would prevent a keeping of the bulk but a winding down of everything else?
Through you, Mr. Chair. There's two parts to the answer to that question. Any changes to the building would require a new amendment process, so they'd have to go back through the whole process. There is a preferred height for the area, is no mandatory height control for the area, but it would have to go through a process similar to this through advertising and making all those changes. The way the controls work as well, that would also require the consent of council in terms of the controls for the comprehensive development zone. The other part, in terms of the quality of the building, there is a condition recommended for Condition 3 to tie the architect into the building. We understand that the quality of the building would rely on the particular feature of the building that we see, so that would be a condition of the permit, and any changes that would require a formal amendment process.
Councillor Voss.
Just to follow up on that, given that it is very important to the community, could you have a Section 173 put on this Section 72 so that they would have to go through a full process if it was going to be flipped, rather than just another 72?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Section 72s must go through the same process as a planning application. 173 conditions must have the same validity as a normal planning condition. The question would be, it'd be a surplus to the reality would be it'd be surplus to the requirements, because you would have a permit and an endorsed plan, and that would give you the guarantees you need. So any variation would require it to go back through a whole process. And what we've seen, even though Section 72 is only consider the changes, it still goes through a public process. And again, Council has an opportunity to support or not support the application.
Okay, so councillors, we do have an alternate officer's recommendation. I understand there are. Councillor Copsey, that's not a question, is it? That's moving. Yeah, okay, good. Just wanted to make sure. So I understand there are some minor changes to the original recommendation. Mr. Borg, could you please take us through the nature of those changes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and apologies for this. There seemed to be a glitch somewhere through the process, but we've got, they're quite minor, but if I take you through, the changes really are in Condition 12, the date of the Sustainable Management Plan has been amended to read 2018, not 2010. I've got them double struck out and underlined because we've got some strikeouts to denote what the previous permit was and some of the new conditions. Condition 17, there was a reference to a previous landscape plan. That's been removed. It's no longer relevant. Condition 21 makes a reference to 14, and we put a strike through there. It actually should be 12 dwellings, not 14 dwellings. And condition 38, we have the word user in this condition. It should be actually replaced with the use.
Thank you, Mr. Borgen. That's the major substance of the changes,
Absolutely.
so mostly typographical errors. Okay, so I'm calling for a mover. It looks like Councillor Copsey to move and Councillor Brand to second. So, Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion? No. Councillor Brand, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I would. I think it's really quite a significant proposal. I note the I guess the collaborative way that council and the applicant and the community have actually worked together to actually achieve what is, I think, an excellent outcome. Excellent in many ways, and I think it's really great that we've come up with something like this. It is a pretty special looking building, and I would just note the. It's sort of the reverse of what normally happens, or so often happens, where you get an application in and it seems, good and acceptable and what have you. So you give the permit, and then you get an amendment back with the architects changed, and a whole lot of dumbing down happening with the materials and the design and what have you to cut all the cost out of it again. So this is in a way the opposite, because we've had an adequate proposal put before us, which has a permit, and now an amendment's come in, and instead of dumbing it down, it sort of smartened it up quite considerably. It's a very unusual reverse, and it's a very welcome one. This is actually bringing this part of Port Melbourne and the waterfront place precinct in particular a really significantly beautiful and good building. I happen to think it may be around the wrong way, but that's my particular thing. The back of it is beautiful. The whole lot of the building is great, and it's high quality. It'll sit there really well, and it's something which I think it can sort of set a benchmark, not in terms of exclusivity, but in terms of quality and consideration for everything else that happens at Waterfront Place. That this is something which it'll have to, everybody will need to live up to and have a model to live up to. So it's really great.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would any other Councillor Boss?
Thank you. Of course, I'd like to say something about this. We've been on such a journey for such a long time with 103 Beach Street, so I'm really pleased to see that it come here today. First of all, I'd just like to thank the residents that have taken such an interest in this particular development, and also the applicant, for taking it over from the previous owners. I agree that it is a significant improvement, and very happy to see the current design. Being a Section 72, we can't sort of re-prosecute some of the areas that I would have liked to, but I was also very pleased to see that the OVGA were very happy with how it looks compared to their last comments. I'm very comfortable with the architects, and I do hope that the development of this building commences very soon. I believe that the status of this particular site and the look of this particular building will really catalyse the renewal of Waterfront Place, which is something that is badly needed. I do have some concerns which I think I have outlined. Most of them are not to do with this application process. It's more around, say, the 109 bike trail, the conflict and congestion. I'm really wanting that sorted out. I am worried about how it would look, and I'm hoping that the hoarding's going to look great so that all the people coming into the community off the ships will see something that's not another derelict site, and that the development of the front lawn and the plaza is done very soon, or in the same time as when this development is is finished. I also just like to thank Mr Parkinson for taking over this application. So the quality of work, I think, has been very good from Ms D'Alessandro, which started this process along the way. So I am supportive of this application, and I wish the developers and the whole team and the architects well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Voss. Would any other councillors like to speak to this? Councillor Pearl.
Sure. Thanks very much. It is a significant improvement, but my stance still remains the same, that I think it's a completely inappropriate use of this very, very important site, and we can't necessarily prosecute that, but I'm voting against it on that basis to ensure that I remain consistent. The reason we're sitting here this evening is a large number of Port Melbourne residents are very, very unhappy with this proposal and remain very unhappy about it. Therefore, I've spoken a great deal on this in the past, and I don't need to go over it again because you've already heard it, but I'll be voting against this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Are there any other councillors that wish to speak? Councillor Copsey, would you like to close? If not, then I will put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move on to item 6.2, Statutory Planning Delegated Decisions Report, October 2019. Do any councillors have any questions of the officers?
Happy to move.
Councillor Gross is happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Simic to second. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the motion? I don't believe you. Is there any other councillor that would like to speak? If not, I will put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried. Fantastic. We now move on to item 7, urgent business. There being no items of urgent business, I'll move to item 8, confidential matters. Councillors, we have no confidential items tonight, and there being no further business, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you all very much.